What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Fireside Giants. I'm your host, Anthony Rivardo, joined by my co-host, Alex Wilson. And this morning on Good Morning Football on NFL Network, Joe Schoen made a guest appearance, discussed the 2023 NFL Draft, and also answered a couple questions about Saquon Barkley. And he had something very interesting to offer to the Good Morning Football crowd and to all of us listening and watching from home on our television sets. He said that the New York Giants have not spoken to Saquon Barkley following the draft, but over the next few days, they do intend to circle back around with Saquon Barkley and his representatives in hopes of finding a new deal. So it'll be interesting to see what happens here and what unfolds with Saquon Barkley and the Giants. As we know, the New York Giants placed the franchise tag on Barkley in February. It reportedly upset him. He's skipping Giants minicamp, voluntary workouts, not going to be there until he gets his long-term contract extension. Now, it does seem like he will play this season on the franchise tag, indicated by the fact that he went out to Arizona, practiced with Daniel Jones and the rest of the offense. He's still a team player. He still looks ready to compete this season. However, he is definitely upset about not having a long-term deal in place. So the Giants and Barkley and his representatives, they're going to be sitting down sometime this week and trying to discuss a new contract. So we're going to go ahead, react to this quote from Joe Schoen, discuss the possibility of a new contract for Saquon Barkley and how likely we think it is to get done in the coming days or weeks. But before we dive into all of that, please make sure to leave a like if you enjoy this episode. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Ring the bell so you don't miss an episode. Comment your thoughts on the topic down below in the comment section. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review. But without further ado, Alex, how are you doing today, my friend? And what are your thoughts on Joe Schoen's quotes about Saquon Barkley?
I am doing great, my friend, and Saquon Barkley, obviously a topic of discussion lately. Now that the NFL draft is over, Joe Schoen is circling back around to figure out what to do with Saquon Barkley, and ultimately, he makes our offense better. That's objectively true. You know, the Giants seem to be going in the more of a pass-happy direction, getting a lot of receivers under contract, and that's a good thing. You know, the ultimate reality is this. A lot of people will point to Saquon's production and say, you know, he's a piece we cannot afford to lose. And I do agree that in some respects, he is a piece we cannot afford to lose. But his production is going to decrease most likely because his workload is going to decrease, which is a good thing for what it's worth. Saquon Barkley's workload decreasing is a good thing for multiple reasons. One, it means he's not going to get injured as frequently. And two, it means everybody else is getting the ball a lot more and our offense isn't a one-trick pony that relies on a running back, which is a injury-prone position, to carry the load. So Saquon Barkley having more support, more options that for Daniel Jones to go to and for this scheme to capitalize on is going to keep him healthy and it's going to keep him productive. And I think that's ultimately what we should be looking at in terms of you bring back Saquon Barkley. It's not because you're going to give him 30 touches a game like we were last year until he got that shoulder injury and the neck injury. It's going to be more so we're giving him 15 to 20 touches a game, which is still a really solid amount for a starting running back. And you're spreading the ball out to Paris Campbell and Isaiah Hodgins and Jalen Hyatt and Daniel Bellinger and Darren Waller and Wan'Dale Robinson and Sterling Shepard and all these names that we just brought in. That's the point of this, right? Saquon Barkley can be an elite player. He is an elite player when he's healthy, but he's going to be even better with the defenses not knowing he's getting the ball every single time, right? All defenses have to do was stack the box and wait for the Giants to throw the ball because they didn't trust that we could throw the ball effectively, and they just played man coverage on us. So they just played a basic zone, and we could not get past it. Our receivers couldn't create separation. We didn't have enough speed. It just really did not work out across the board. So I'm pretty happy bringing back Saquon with the idea that knowing he's going to get a reduced workload, which will keep him healthy, which should actually aid in his production over the course of a season because he won't miss time, I think is a beneficial thing. So the question here is, how much is he worth? Knowing all these variables and all these factors, it's impossible to tell, but I don't think Joe Schoen is willing to move much on his initial offer, right? We know that he offered Saquon $12 million per season, and ultimately that was rejected, and he was like, I'd rather play on the franchise tag, or rather not play at all. And, you know, now the Giants have to consider the fact that, you know, what is his price tag going to be? Are his agents willing to settle at around, I don't know, $13 million? Because I don't think Shane's going to move very much from where he's at right now. That's the big thing. So, Anthony, when you're looking at what feels right, you know, Saquon's agents are definitely asking for too much because otherwise a deal would be done already. But if you're looking at the situation happening right now, what do you think is fair for the two sides? It's hard to say, but I'll let you give your take on it.
It's really tough to say because when you look at the status of the running back market, I mean, this offseason, the running back that got paid the highest amount was Miles Sanders. He only got paid $6.35 million per season. Now, that's well under the $10 million for the franchise tag, and that's well under the $12.5 million that the Giants offered Saquon Barkley during their 2022 bye week. So when you're looking at it from that perspective, one might argue that the market value for a running back for a top tier running back is underneath the franchise tag value. And so that's kind of what makes this so tough for Saquon Barkley and the Giants to agree to terms here because they're paying him $10.1 million on the franchise tag. Some might look at that as a value pay, right? As a bargain. Others might look at that as an overpay because look at the value of running backs and what they're fetching on the market. There's only a handful of running backs making over the franchise tag value. You have Aaron Jones at 11.5, Joe Mixon at 12, Nick Chubb at 12, Derrick Henry at 12.5, Dalvin Cook at 12.6, Kamara at 15, and then of course the highest paid being Christian McCaffrey at $16 million per season. Now, the reports that we heard were that Saquon Barkley wasn't looking to reset the market for the running back position. He wasn't looking to get over the $16 million that McCaffrey makes, but he was looking to get very close to McCaffrey's $16 million. So we're talking 15 to 16 because Kamara's at 15. And of course, the next highest after him is Dalvin Cook and Derrick Henry at 12.5. And we know that both of those players, Cook and Henry, were on the trade block this offseason because they feel those two teams, the Vikings and the Titans, feel like they're overpaying at that position. So that's something to keep in mind as well, is that these contracts that were handed out to these running backs at that 12.5 million range, these teams that handed out those contracts seem to be regretting them. The Giants went and offered him $12.5 million anyway. He rejected that. So now we're sitting here and wondering, how much does he truly want to be paid? And are the Giants still willing to even pay him the $12.5 million that they offered him? And I'm not so sure. I feel like the Giants are probably firm on their stance here and not willing to budge and probably content to let him play out on the franchise tag. Because again, you look at the franchise tag value. The highest paid player above the franchise tag is at $11.5 million, but after the three running backs on the franchise tag, Tony Pollard, Josh Jacobs, and Saquon Barkley, the next highest paid player is only making $7 million per season, and that's James Conner. So that's kind of the market value for a top running back, not elite running back, but a good running back in today's age. A $7 million max value on those guys. Only the handful of elite guys are making over $10 million, but at this point, seeing how all of these teams are regretting those $10+ million contracts that they handed out, I think the Giants are trying to look at this and say, we don't want to be one of those teams that regret that. So let's try and find the way to make this contract very flexible, maybe incentive laden. I know you pitched that idea on Twitter, Alex. So I'll let you speak on that in just a second. But I think the Giants might be looking at this from a perspective where they don't want to find themselves in the same position as the Titans after signing Derrick Henry, as the Vikings after signing Dalvin Cook. I don't think that they're willing to go back to that number that they originally offered him of $12.5 million. I could be wrong. Maybe they circle back around. Maybe the two sides agree to the original contract that was offered. But right now, I think that the Giants are trying to get him under the original contract offer of $12.5 million per season. And at this point, based on the way that the market has fallen, I think that they're well within their rights to try and lower that number. But again, it's only going to create more tension, and Saquon Barkley is only going to get more and more upset by that. But Alex, yesterday we discussed the Giants salary cap space, the contracts that Joe Schoen has signed, all how flexible they've all been and how many of them are incentive laden. So what are your thoughts on the Giants potentially trying to get Saquon Barkley to sign to an incentive-laden contract? Maybe it's $12.5 million max per season, but it's really like a $9 million per season contract. There's just so many incentives in there that bring it up to the value that he wants it to be. What are your thoughts on that? And do you think that's a realistic possibility for the Giants?
I mean, look, incentivized deals are objectively a good thing for any team, right? Like, you want to save as much money as possible. So, when it comes to a running back, it makes logical sense. So you'd ask them to accept an incentivized deal. If you hit this rushing mark, if you have over 1,000 yards, if you score 10 touchdowns, you get major pay increases. So that way you protect yourself just in case they don't reach those marks or they get injured, which is a high probability compared to any other position. So if I'm Joe Schoen, of course I'm trying to build an incentivized deal, and I'm sure there will be incentives in the contract no matter what, but it's all about guaranteed money, right? So even if the Giants say, we'll give you we'll give you 3 years and we'll give you $36 million, or let's say $40 million, right? 3 years, $40 million. Maybe that's as much as he wants, but it doesn't matter if the guarantees are like 30% or 40% of the contract. Saquon's probably looking for a deal that's giving him at least 50% guaranteed money. So, if he has $40 million, he's guaranteed $20 million. Now, the Giants have been taking a different strategy lately and front-loading a lot of the guaranteed money in these contracts instead of backloading it. That way they can get rid of that dead money right off the bat and move on earlier on in contracts if they need to. For Saquon, I'd give him a 3-year deal with an out after the second season, and I'd give him half of the money guaranteed because, at the end of the day, what is he going to make? $13 million per season, so 36 or $39 million. And then you're kind of like, all right, you give him whatever it might be, 17 and a half. I don't even know the number. So you look at that money, you give him half of basically $40 million, so $20 million, and you walk into the sunset with an out after the second season so you protect yourself long term, and then you match up his contract with Daniel Jones's deal. And I think that's kind of where I'm looking at this right now, in the sense that I think Daniel Jones is better with Saquon on the field. I think those two guys complement each other, and I think that you kind of stick with that. You don't mess that chemistry up. That's one of the only things, and this is my take, this is kind of like my overarching take here. Daniel Jones has been forced to change coordinators every single year. He's been forced to change his receivers every single year, change his offensive line every single year. The only consistent piece has been Saquon Barkley. The only person who's been there for him and helping this offense go when it's not DJ running or trying to throw to guys that should be on practice squads is Saquon Barkley. So I think that there's a chemistry element here. There's also an intangible element here when it comes to his, character and kind of what he offers the team behind the scenes, in the sense that he's a leader, he's a captain, everybody likes him, he elevates everybody game around him, he demands a lot of attention on the football field, which helps other players succeed and produce. So I feel as though Saquon's, kind of presence shouldn't be overlooked, because there's a lot of stuff that just you can't put a number on it. You can't say he had 500 rushing yards, he had 100 rushing yards this game, or 1,000 rushing yards, or 2,000 all-purpose yards. There's a lot of things you have to consider in this fact, this kind of situation that goes under the radar, and I think that Saquon and DJ could be tied to the hip. You could match up that contract with Saquon Barkley's, you could match up Saquon's contract with Daniel Jones's deal, and that way, if neither of them pan out, you move on from both. If Daniel Jones becomes a superstar, then you can move on from Saquon Barkley and allocate that money towards a wide receiver one, or drafting another guy, or you keep Saquon Barkley until he runs out of gas. There's a lot of options here, but I feel as though, at the very least, you tie 2 years of Saquon to Daniel Jones and give him the one constant piece he's had over the course of his tenure with Big Blue. And I think that's fair. I think that's right by Saquon, is right by Daniel Jones, and it forces opposing offenses to commit to the run game, and it opens up your speedsters like Jalen Hyatt and Darius Slayton. So that's my objective, positive outlook. My negative outlook would say, can you trust him to stay healthy? And I think by reducing his workload, you can improve the probability he does. So it all kind of flows back into a one itself, but that's kind of my logic at this point in time. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I want to touch on the workload thing that you mentioned there, because I think that, something we haven't really just hit on yet is the fact that the Giants did spend a 4th-round pick on the running back position with Eric Gray out of Oklahoma. Now, the thinking behind that, I know a lot of Giants fans who like to play a little bit of devil's advocacy. They're going to say, oh, that's the Saquon Barkley replacement long term. They're not going to re-sign him. Eric Gray will be the starter. Now, listen, I think that Eric Gray has starting qualities, and I think that one day he could be a solid starter in the NFL, but that's not why the Giants drafted him. The Giants drafted him because Saquon Barkley led all running backs in the NFL last season by spending 80% of the Giants' offensive snaps on the field. That's absurd. For a running back to be on the field for 80% of a team's snaps is crazy. That's because the Giants didn't have depth and they didn't have any quality players behind Saquon Barkley at the running back position. Sure, they had Matt Breida when he was healthy. They had Gary Brightwell. They had a couple guys, but none of those guys really stand out. None of those guys are 3-down players. Eric Gray will be a 3-down player once he develops into one at the next level. That was super important for the Giants to find that guy behind Saquon Barkley. Firstly, because Saquon Barkley does have an injury history. We'll see if he stays healthy this year, right? Because it's kind of been a mixed bag for Saquon throughout the past 3 seasons. He stayed healthy this year. He didn't really miss any time with injury. Yeah, came out for a few games with, the neck injury, as you mentioned, shoulder injury, as you mentioned. But overall, a very healthy year for Saquon Barkley, despite being on the field more than any other running back. But still, it's not ideal that a guy who suffered 2 significant injuries in his career so so far, not ideal to have him on the field for 80% of those snaps. So drafting Eric Gray was not the Saquon Barkley replacement. I mean, sure, it could pan out to be, depending on how this contract negotiation goes. We'll see what the future holds. But drafting Eric Gray really just gives the Giants a solid second option so that they can take Saquon Barkley off the field, keep him healthy, keep him from getting burnt out. Because let's be honest, the first half of the season, Saquon Barkley was something else. The second half of the season, he wasn't quite as good as he was during the first half. And that probably has to do with the fact that he got a little bit burnt out being on the field for 80% of the snaps. Not his fault. He was phenomenal all the way through. I even think that he was great in the postseason. I wish that the Giants utilized him more in the postseason. However, they didn't. And of course, one of the reasons why is probably because he was a little bit burnt out. He did play way too many snaps throughout the regular season. The Giants drafting Eric Gray, the point of that was to make sure that Barkley isn't overworked, isn't burnt out by the time the postseason rolls around, and he can go into the postseason with fresh legs and hopefully lead the Giants to a championship. So again, I think that Saquon Barkley's back this year. I think he's probably back for the long-term future as well. I do think eventually they will come to terms on a deal, but I don't think that Saquon Barkley is going to get the money that he wants. Now, in terms of tying him to the hip of Daniel Jones, I like that idea because I do think that those two play very well together, very familiar with each other. We know that they're good friends, and I also think that if one crashes and burns, the other one's probably going down with him, as you mentioned, Alex. So I do think that it would be important for the Giants to tie those two at the hip. You're looking at that Daniel Jones contract. It's a 4-year deal, but it's really a 2-year deal if you want it to be. The Giants can cut him in 2 years from now and really have very minimal financial penalties. So if I had to make any sort of assumption here, here's been my guess for the whole offseason. I think that the Giants land with Saquon Barkley on a 3-year deal with an out after 2 years, so that if they have to get out of the Daniel Jones contract, they also get out of the Saquon Barkley contract, move on, new start, fresh beginning, probably draft a quarterback, whatever. Again, don't want to see that happen. Desperately want Daniel Jones to succeed. Desperately want Saquon Barkley to lift a Lombardi trophy, maybe put it between his ginormous quads and celebrate, right? I would love to see that happen. But if it doesn't work out, I do think, considering Daniel Jones has that out after 2 seasons, Saquon Barkley, whatever deal he ends up signing this offseason, if he does sign one at all, should also have an out after 2 seasons so that in 2 years from now, if the Giants need to, they can reboot, reset, just start over from new. And I think that's something that's really important to take away from not only these 2 contracts that we're discussing, Saquon Barkley, Daniel Jones, but all of the contracts that Joe Schoen has given out this offseason. They've all been super flexible, and they kind of all have the ability to reset in 2 years' time. So if the Giants suck within these next 2 years, they can go ahead, reset, start over, and I think that's something that's really, really important. But Alex, ultimately, before we wrap, where do you think this contract falls? Do you think he reaches 12 million, 12 and a half, 13 million? Do you think he goes higher? Or do you think that the Giants stand firm, kind of force him to play on the franchise tag, or maybe just give him franchise tag money, but across multiple seasons? I think that's kind of a fine compromise, right? If Saquon Barkley's willing to play out this year at 10.1 million, well, maybe he'll be willing to play out the next 3 years at 10.1 million. And I do think that that's an idea there that maybe the Giants will pitch now that the running back market has really significantly fallen. But what are your thoughts on that? Where do you think that the annual salary ultimately lands for Saquon if they do get a deal done this offseason?
I think the annual salary is irrelevant, like I mentioned earlier. But if I had to guess, I think they signed him to a 3-year, $40 million deal, which is a little bit less than $13.5 million per season. I believe, if I do the math, it is $13.3 million per season. And I think they gave him about 45% of it guaranteed, close to 50%. I think it's going to be, you're looking at, 40 divided by, so 20, I think it's probably a 3-year, $40 million deal with $20 million guaranteed. So he gets his guarantee money, he gets his years, but the Giants have an out in the second season that allows them to move on with minimal dead cap. And I think that's probably the most fair deal he's going to get. $13.3 million. The Giants offered him 12 and a half. He gets a little bit more than that, and he gets 50% guaranteed, and he gets to stay with the Giants, gets to stay in New York, where he's kind of developed this image. And, there's a lot of marketing capabilities in New York. Obviously, that's the best market to be in terms of your financial image and what you can do. So I think that there's a lot of benefit to that as well. And, he gets to stick with the team that drafted him. And I think that's ultimately another variable that plays into it. And he wants to be here, and the Giants want him to be here. It just has to be the right number. So I'm going to go, my final, take here is 3 years, $40 million deal. And then they have an out after the second season. It's $20 million guaranteed. And maybe there's some incentives built into it, reaching a certain amount of yards, playing a certain amount of games, a certain amount of snaps, something like that.
Yeah, and I think that you're right in line there. I think it's going to be somewhere around 3 years, 36 million, around 12 million per year. But again, I think the main thing to focus on is there's probably going to be an out after 2 seasons. So again, like I mentioned, if they want to move on from Daniel Jones, move on from Saquon Barkley, they can do it in the same offseason, restart from new, and rebuild the New York Giants from the ground up. So I think that's going to be the main takeaway that I have from this discussion. But let us know your main takeaways, your thoughts and opinions down below in the comment section. And if you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new, ring the bell so you don't miss an episode. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review. But without further ado, we will catch you all in the next one. Have a good one, and let's go Giants.